But there's already people who donate $200 per month to Mars One. $200 per month, and that's in our current phase where we have, well, and we've had good accomplishments, but of course we're still really in the beginning of our project. Imagine how much more of these kinds of things will occur when we achieve more. So I think there's not hundreds but thousands of business cases for a human mission to Mars that we can't even imagine yet, like funeral services.
Does MIT wish to spend a minute to answer Bas's remarks?
Well, one question that I would have, he's talking about this great interest.
What do you want to answer his remarks?
Well, this is in relation to those.
Okay.
So in relation to the idea of developing this enormous interest and this enormous sustained interest, because your costs are sunk for the rest of their lives if they're the ones to go. I don't know how long you guys intend to live, but presumably a long time. The Apollo experience was we landed on the moon and interest dropped rather sharply until Apollo 13, and then it went up again and then it went back down again, and we're not on the moon anymore. With the International Space Station, it's this wonderful object in orbit, and a lot of people really don't care. Like, oh yeah, we got a space station, cool. At what point, I mean, there's a concern that it becomes, yes, there's this peak of interest. We've landed on Mars. We've lived on Mars for 6 months. We've made it to a year. Oh, those guys are on Mars. Yeah, we have people on Mars. Like, the interest starts to decay over time. So in your business plans and in your considerations for all this, how are you going to deal with that factor?
Well, as I said, there are many business cases, so intellectual property is one of them. Mars One will always make sure that we become co-owner of the intellectual property of the systems that our suppliers build for us. And we were already doing that for our follow-up contract with Lockheed, and that's perfectly acceptable for them. But that's just one. So then there's funeral services, there's research for other space agencies, and there will be many more of those kinds of business cases. But just the media business case, so the media exposure business case, sponsorship and partnerships. I have talked to many media experts, and they all confirm that this is something that people will be interested in for decades, because it is not. It's not a couple of test pilots that were picked for reasons that nobody really understood. This is an adventure where we take people along for the journey, not as Big Brother, but much more like the Olympic Games, which is repeated every 2 years and draws huge attention every time. And we don't need an Olympic audience all the time to finance our missions. And we need one Olympic event worth of media exposure per 2 years. So that's, and the Olympic Games are 3 weeks. 2 years is 100 weeks, so we need 1/30th of the interest for the Olympic Games on average over the year to fund it with only the media business case. 1/30th. That's really not a lot of interest. And that's, media companies have said to me, we develop formats. And we don't know if they will be successful, because otherwise we would only produce successful formats. But all the media companies that I talked to, it's about 4 major media companies, they all said this is the exception. This is something, it's so inherently interesting to humans. Exploration is coded in our genome. Either you want to go and you're jealous of the people that are going and you want to live the experience through them, or you don't want to go and you're terrified of the idea and you're even more interested in it. And that is something that will be, according to these companies, sustained for a very long time. I actually, when I came up with the idea together with Arno of the media revenue, we talked to a very famous Dutch media expert, and he said, for decades and decades. We went home.
Let's wind it up. I want to more from the floor.
I'll wrap it up really quickly. It's important. We were driving home shouting, yeah, we have a business case. And then we came up with the same conclusion. We went back to him and asked him exactly the same question. And that is what he said, and that's what all the other media companies that we've talked to said.
Good. Now, I want to take questions from the floor directed to one team or the other. They should answer in a minute, and the other team should reply in a minute. Okay, who wants to throw one at the MIT team? Over there. Right here. What? Do you want to throw one at the MIT team?
Yeah.
Good.
I wanted to address a part in your study that I don't think we talked about a lot, which was it's kind of the morbid part about crop production and oxygen and carbon dioxide. I think you guys found there's like a catch-22 situation that there wouldn't be enough crops, or the crops wouldn't produce enough oxygen, and if you had more crops, it would produce way too much oxygen, which might lead to like a fire risk. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit more and what the problems were associated with that.
Yeah, sure. So there are a couple of dimensions to that analysis. First, we were testing the claim that Mars One said that they will only use 50 square meters to sustain 12 people, 3 crews of 4. We did analysis and found that they actually need 4 times the amount of crop growth area to sustain a third of the people, and that's really, really optimistic, assuming best case scenario to plant crop growth. Now, with regard to your imbalances in the gases, that's been known within the life support community for quite some time, that the amount of CO2 produced by humans can only sustain about half the crops that you would need to keep yourself alive. And so the point of that, and that was an analysis that was intermediate, that was not the biggest finding of our study, and emphasized that on many, many occasions, was that if you're going to grow crops, you need a means to separate oxygen from the atmosphere selectively to manage that imbalance, basically because crops and humans have different atmospheric requirements. However, in addition, our study found that over the life cycle of the program, in that study we found that growing crops was more expensive than carrying food along because of all the infrastructure required to sustain that. But since then we've been, do you want to talk about that?
Well, I guess like the main issue with the crops is if you have enough crops so that your oxygen and carbon dioxide are balanced, you don't have enough food. If you have enough crops to grow all your food, then your oxygen and carbon dioxide aren't balanced anymore. So I think that's one thing, we're not saying this is impossible to solve. It's just an additional consideration that I think you would note as well, that these are known in the biological community. So the issue there with the fire risk, for example, is we were trying to test the Mars One plan as described, which was grow all the food for the crew using crops. And if you do that, you have this oxygen problem where the fire risk becomes large.
So the important fact, I'll wrap it up real quick. So the important point from that finding is that you need more crop area. If you were to go with Mars One's assumptions and more technologies than they had originally claimed. And as I mentioned earlier, if you change your scope, your cost and schedule need to adjust accordingly.
Okay. Does Mars One want to answer those remarks?
Yeah, hey, I'll talk to this one. So we've talked about this a couple of times, guys. To the question that was asked, the main issue was, and I know you said it wasn't a main point, but at the end of the day, the result that you came up with, that the crew was going to die, that is what the media latched onto. And it was a very simple assumptions you all made, and we've talked about it. We know what you did, why you did it, in terms of running the model. But the point is and this is another slide I was going to add if I had time. There's a tremendous knowledge base out there. In the 90s and 2000s, a lot of work was done on biogenetic life support. There's I can get anyone with a paper that lists over 680 publications. There's straightforward ways you go do this crop production. You don't plant it all at once. You combust the inedible parts as you get that CO2 back to do the balancing. So there's a knowledge base out there to know how to go do that, and that wasn't included in your model. And that's a good lesson. I don't know if you guys admit it, but that was a lesson that was learned the hard way. When you build a model like that, you you made assumptions, and I know you made those assumptions, and maybe you didn't get the feedback you were looking for from Mars One about the assumptions. But you make that assumption, you get an output from a model, and you get a nonsensical output. I mean, we all know this. No one's going to vent the atmosphere on Mars to maintain CO2 or oxygen levels. No one would design a system like that. It's nonsensical. But unfortunately, that's what the media picked up on. And I know you guys know that's nonsensical. But that's what they picked up on. And it's unfortunate that happened because it takes away from the rest of the message and the rest of the world. And it was tough.
I'd like to ask a clarifying question because I'm surprised by the statement. If you grow enough food to feed the crew, then you're CO2 short, is what you said. How can you be CO2 short on Mars?
So you're CO2 short without an additional option, which we implemented.
Like opening the window.
Yes, which we implemented in the model. And then the other problem comes up because the crops create the oxygen. So you are CO2 short and oxygen long. basically.
But you're gonna pipe.
It's an imbalance, it's a cycle.
Okay, but to be clear, CO2 is a readily available resource on Mars.
Yes, and we implemented it in the model.
And you don't have to only get it from respiration.
Yes, and we implemented exactly like you say in the model. We're agreeing with each other.
Okay, let's take another question. Who wants to throw one at Mars?